Of course, as I read the gospel, you paid attention to the gospel words and probably focused on the lectern. But it would have been more appropriate to get a visual to look at our altar, because our altar depicts the moment that Jesus said, "One of you will betray me." Now, that particular sculpture is based on the painting of Leonardo da Vinci in Milan at the monastery of Santa Maria della Grazia. But it depicts the moment when Jesus is saying, "One of you will betray me," and all of the apostles are like excited and nervous. Those on the far end contemplating who could he be talking about. John, having just leaned over to Jesus, is being told by Peter, "Ask him who it is." So John is leaning toward Peter, and eventually he'll lean toward Jesus. And the others are like astounded. And one standing like, "Is it me? Who could it be?" The questions going through their heads. And calmly seated in this left portion of the table, holding his bag of money, Judas is depicted, calmly staring at Jesus. Evil is like that. Evil keeps a low profile until it attacks. And the others standing up in their seats, like, who could this be? When I was in the 3rd grade, Sister Carmela told a story about that particular setting, the setting of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. It was a myth, but it made an impression on me how many years later. She said when Leonardo was looking for the characters to paint to represent each of the apostles, he looked around the streets and taverns and public places, and for the most part, he kept finding people that he could use as Peter and James and John and so on. But he had 2 challenges. One challenge was to find a most beautiful, pleasant-looking man to portray as Jesus. So he searched and searched and went through the other apostles, found the beautiful man, and posed him. And then he was satisfied. He almost had everybody down pat, all of the apostles. But he couldn't find a man that, from his artistic eye, would represent Judas. There had to be something about this character that portrayed subtle evil. I say subtle because he wasn't known to be evil by the other apostles. Jesus knew him, but no one else did, as this evil person, the person who would betray Jesus. So he searched and searched, and many years later, he went to a prison, and there he found someone that in his eye would be the character to portray Judas, who would deny and betray Jesus. And he asked him if he could borrow him from the prison and if he would pose for him for this painting that he's making in the monastery on the wall of the dining room. And the man agreed. It wasn't ugly so much as evil looking, and that's in the eye of the beholder. So he brings them into the monastery, and he's around all his paints and so on, and Leonardo had special kinds of methods of painting, very revolutionary, to the point that some of it was even peeling in his lifetime. It was a kind of mix of tempera and oils, and and other kinds of paint. And when he set the man down to look around and told him where he would be in the painting, the man said, I know this painting. Now, Leonardo, it's in a monastery. What would this guy be doing in a monastery? So Leonardo doubted him. No, you don't know this painting. No, he says, years ago, before I embraced my life of crime, I was here. I was the man you chose for Jesus. Through the years after that experience here, my life was in distress. I've been accused of murder and stealing and a whole bunch of other stuff, and therefore I've been imprisoned for years. The beautiful face of Jesus was distorted through history to the face of Judas, face of evil. Michelangelo tried to capture the moment that we heard in today's gospel. It is the gospel of Holy Thursday, but because of it's so significant, we use it during Holy Week as we move toward the Triduum, Thursday, Friday, and Easter. John put it this way, very succinctly. After Judas had taken the morsel, he left. I want to quote it. And it was night. It was night. This is John's Gospel. John's Gospel is filled with symbolism. And one of the key symbols that he uses consistently is light and darkness. Light being the presence of God, darkness being the presence of evil. So when the people come to Jesus in the nighttime, they are coming to learn about him. They are coming to be, quote, enlightened. So they come to him at night like Nicodemus, but leaves enlightened by the message of Jesus. John uses this symbol of light and darkness very beautifully. And in one phrase, captures for us the heaviness of that night and the subsequent days of Jesus being on trial, Jesus before Pilate, Jesus before Caiaphas, Jesus being whipped, Jesus being crowned with thorns. It's all captured, I think, so beautifully and succinctly with that one word. It was night. And what happens at night? Well, earlier in the gospel, Jesus talked about night. Again, this is John's gospel. And he talks about how people who are proud of what they do it during the daytime when people could see them. But those who sin at night when no one can see them. They fade into the darkness so that their deeds may not be seen publicly. See how John, in one phrase, captures the whole mission of Judas? He entered into the night, and we know what happened subsequently after that. He went to the chief priests and said, "How much will you give me for him?" And they decided on a sum of 30 pieces of silver. And he sold out Jesus. To his defense, some theologians say, he was not being evil, he was just greedy and thought he could make a few bucks turning Jesus over to them, never thinking that Jesus would be killed by them. Judas's thought, as a Jew, was turn it over to the priests. They'll question him and let him go free. That's one thought. The other is more dramatic, taken up by Dante in the Divine Inferno, that there's a place in hell, the lowest part of hell, for Judas because of what he did that night in turning Jesus over. Let's substitute the word Jesus for goodness. He turns goodness over to evil. If you look at creation and the opening lines of Scripture in Genesis, God created all things and looked at them, and we'll hear this reading on the vigil of Easter, Saturday. He looked at everything that he had created, and it was good. And the summary of creation is his Son, the good one, Jesus, light of the world. So when we look at Judas's actions from that perspective, he turned over God's only Son. He turned over the light and entered the darkness, and with him, his deeds of darkness take over the light. Subsequently, we know Jesus put on trial and tortured. What happens to Judas, who entered the night? Maybe we look at it differently today because of our advance in behavioral sciences, but he committed suicide. Today we look at suicide as a psychological illness. Someone who has mental illness, who can't deal with life as it is, and subsequently some commit suicide, take their own life. And that's what Judas did. Was he suffering from guilt? Was he suffering from the anxiety of seeing Jesus being beaten and tortured and carrying his cross to Calvary? Was he suffering for the guilt that he had just handed Jesus over? Was he suffering from the anxiety of knowing that Jesus, who trusted him, was betrayed by him? We can only guess. You and I and theologians can all put our thoughts together and say maybe it was this or maybe it was that. But it was evil. That's the key. It was evil. And it was done at night. There is a section of the gospel, you all know, when Jesus goes out to his apostles who are out on the Sea of Galilee, and the waves are running, and the rain was coming, and the winds were buffeting the boat, and it was night. And it was the third hour of night, middle of the night, like 4:30 in the morning. Theologians examining that have said the symbolism of that event is so important because nothing good happens at that time of night. Things have changed through the centuries, maybe. When we hear in the morning that there was an accident or a murder on our streets at 3 o'clock in the morning, how many people without sympathy say, well, what was that person doing out at 3 o'clock in the morning? It's the same thing. In the middle of the night. But we're not talking about night and day, sun and moon. We're talking about the symbolism of darkness. The symbolism of us entering the night of our lives. And we're all privy to that. We're all born good. God created every one of us, looked at us, and saw that we were good. And so many of God's creation has entered into the night. So many people have chosen evil. I don't have to list the headlines of our Twitter feeds or our Facebooks. You know the headlines. You know what the news commentaries are talking about. The bloodshed in so many parts of the world. And God made the whole world good. And yet you have bloodshed, prejudice, anger, murder in almost every continent right now. Not one-on-one, but nation upon nation. It makes us realize why Jesus had to die on the cross. To offer himself for the blood of all humanity. To bring humanity back to the way we were created in God's image, good. Because right now, humanity, as we know it, is going through the darkness of night. Geographically, we can pinpoint different sections of the world. Whether it's day or night, morning or evening, so many of our sisters and brothers through many parts of the world are experiencing the night that Judas entered. This week, we try to reconcile ourselves to God. Pray for ourselves. Yes, definitely pray for ourselves. But pray for those who are in the night and choose not to leave the night. Pray for those who are, quote, the criminals of our societies throughout the world. They need our prayers because they are the Judases. God made us all light and good. But because of power, misguided leadership, prejudice, and hate, they have entered the night. This week ends with light. This week ends when Christ conquered night, the resurrection. But before we get to the resurrection, let's walk with Jesus through the rest of this holiest of weeks.